I never thought a backyard brunch would end with my son kicking me out of my own home. It was a warm Sunday morning in Tempe, the kind where everything smells like citrus and sunscreen. Kyle had the grill going, music playing too loud, Chelsea clinking mimosas with her friends like it was already a party for them. My folding chair groaned under me as I sipped my coffee, quietly, trying not to think about the bills still sitting on my desk back in the casita. Then Kyle cleared his throat. He stood up like he was making a toast. All eyes on him, that stupid grin he gets when he thinks he's about to impress everyone. "We've got news," he said, wrapping an arm around Chelsea's waist. "We hit the jackpot. Literally." Chelsea held up a printout, her acrylic nails tapping against the numbers. $23 million. She beamed. "State lottery." There was a beat of silence, then whoops and cheers. His buddies slapped him on the back. Chelsea's friends shrieked and hugged. I clapped once, stiffly, already uneasy. Then Kyle turned to me, still grinning, but something in his eyes had changed. Sharper, like he was about to take a bite. "Hey, Dad," he said, "you can stop sending your pension check now. We don't need your money anymore." I blinked. "I didn't know I was sending it to you." Laughter rippled around the patio, but Kyle didn't break eye contact. Chelsea leaned in beside him, her champagne flute swaying in her hand like she was about to toast something cruel. "And actually," she said, her voice all honey and poison, "we were talking last night. You've been in the casita a long time, and with the lottery money, well, we think it's time you moved into a nice assisted living place." I didn't answer right away, just stared at the two of them, perfectly framed by the shade sails I installed last summer. The grill behind Kyle hissed like it knew what was coming. Chelsea giggled. "Don't look so shocked. It's not like you'll be on the street. We already toured some places with memory care, just in case." I laughed. Once, quiet and slow. Then, I stood up. "You might want to check," I said, pulling my sunglasses down and looking Kyle dead in the eye. "Whose name is printed on that lottery ticket?" 3 weeks earlier, Kyle had borrowed my truck. "Just needed to run a few errands, Dad. Oil change, Costco run, stuff like that." I handed him the keys. No hesitation. It was a Saturday morning, and I was working on the sprinkler system again. He gave me a pat on the shoulder like I was the help, and peeled out of the driveway with the tailgate bouncing. When he brought it back later that night, the bumper was scratched. Rear left corner. White paint, probably a parking lot post. He didn't mention it. Gas tank nearly bone dry too. I had to siphon from the jerry can I kept in the shed just to make it to the station. He didn't offer to fix either. Chelsea had already been circling with her questions. "So, when do you think you'll want to downsize?" she'd ask, every few days, like it was casual. "You don't really need all that space in the casita, do you? Wouldn't it be easier to, relax somewhere, with a dining hall and a nurse on call?" The first time, I let it slide. By the 5th, I started writing things down. They thought I was drifting, that I wasn't paying attention, that I'd stopped being the man who used to catch bad inventory before it ever hit the books. But I saw it. Every comment, every smile that didn't reach their eyes, every skipped "please," every half step closer to moving me out of the picture. That truck? It wasn't about the bumper or the gas. It was about Kyle assuming he could take, brake, and walk off whistling. And the thing is, if you'd asked me then, if you'd sat me down at the kitchen table and said, "Richard, what's really going on?" I probably would have lied. I would have said they're just busy, just stressed, just trying to help in their own way. But that's not what I saw in my rearview mirror that night as I drove my scratched-up truck back from the gas station. What I saw was a timestamp. For a long time, I kept telling myself they were just trying to help. Clumsily, maybe, but without malice. When Kyle offered to simplify my finances and set up my pension deposits into a joint account, I didn't argue. He said it would make it easier to manage utilities, internet, insurance, keep everything in one place. That day I was tired, the heat was brutal, and my knees were screaming again. I just nodded and signed the papers. Then they started in on the roof. "Don't waste your money, Dad," Kyle said, standing in the driveway with his arms crossed, like he was the only adult in the room. "We're gonna Airbnb the house next year anyway, remember? No one's gonna be looking at the roof." From the porch, Chelsea chimed in, glass of rosé in hand. "Exactly. No need to get emotional over shingles." They laughed, smug and casual, like I was being ridiculous, and I let it go. Again, until I found the invoice. I was looking for a warranty in the hallway drawer when I came across the bill. Monthly charges for a storage unit under my name. I called the number, and a woman confirmed the account. Richard Reyes, paid regularly. Items logged in by Chelsea Martin Reyes. My address. I drove straight there. Clean place. Bright lights. Cold air. My old recliner sat in the back, next to my record shelf, and the little side table Maria and I bought at a flea market in '87. I had sanded that thing down, stained it by hand, gave it to her for our anniversary. All of it, gone from my casita, boxed up without a single word. I stood in that storage unit and didn't feel anger or heartbreak, just clarity. This wasn't help. This was dismantling. Quiet, strategic, executed by people who assumed I wouldn't notice. But I noticed. I left with a printed receipt, photos of every item, and one thought rolling over in my mind like thunder in the distance. They always thought I was slipping. Not in a cruel way at first, more like the way people smile too brightly at someone who's hard of hearing. Little pauses in conversation, slow hand gestures, calling things too complicated for me to manage now. Kyle once called me old school, like it was a compliment, then asked if I needed help using the thermostat app on my phone. I played along, smiled, let them think the wires were fraying. What they never bothered to ask, or remember, was what I actually did for a living. Before I retired, I managed audit systems for the regional utility co-op. I built frameworks that tracked energy fraud, caught internal leaks, traced missing data back to the minute it went off. I didn't just fill out spreadsheets. I designed the systems that told others when to worry, and I never stopped keeping records. There's a fireproof box in the closet of the casita, under the extra linens marked Tools. Inside it, there are photocopies of every major document since 1994. Pensions, taxes, home titles, insurance. 2 envelopes are marked with red tape. One contains disbursement reports from the last 15 years. The other holds lottery receipts and scratch-off tickets I've been buying since Maria passed. Sometimes it gave me something to look forward to on a Friday, even if it was just $10 and a new ticket. And that last ticket, the one with the winning numbers? Kyle bought it, yes. But he used my cash, handed to him from the envelope I keep by the door for errands. He picked it up from my gas station, using my loyalty card to get the discount. I remember it clearly because I had asked him to pick up propane and a bag of rock salt. He brought the propane and forgot the salt. Later that night I'd found the scratcher on the entry table. He said it didn't win, left it with the mail. I tucked it into the drawer in my workbench, like I always do. A week later he was announcing their new fortune at brunch. They never checked the timestamp, never thought I'd kept the stub, never imagined I'd kept the original, but I had, and now it was going to matter. I didn't call a lawyer first. Instead, I called Carla Ruiz. Back when I was still working audits, she'd been the sharpest mind in the compliance division, the one who noticed trends in financial data before the algorithms caught them. People assumed she was just fast with numbers, but the truth was, Carla paid attention to motives, not just mistakes. She understood that numbers don't lie, but people do, and they usually start small. She'd left the co-op a few years before I did, and opened her own practice as a forensic accountant. Not the kind that handles tax prep or divorce paperwork, Carla specialized in untangling deception. Family trusts, elder financial abuse, inheritance mismanagement. The work people pretend doesn't exist until it's too late. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, but when I left a voicemail and said, "I think my son's trying to erase me," she called back within an hour. We met at a diner halfway between her office and my casita, a neutral booth with bad coffee and quiet lighting. Carla slid a notepad across the table as soon as I sat down. She didn't waste time asking how I'd been. "Start from the beginning," she said, already writing the date in the corner of the page. "What's your name doing on a storage invoice you didn't sign?" I laid it all out. The pension account, the joint setup, the roof, the slow removal of my furniture, and finally, the lottery ticket. Her pen didn't stop moving. When I handed her the copies, bank statements, photos, the lottery stub itself, she paused, adjusted her glasses, and looked me in the eye. "You kept everything," she said. "I'm not as disoriented as they want me to be," I replied. She nodded slowly. "Then we build your side of the story, now, before they realize you're even moving." That night, per her instruction, I transferred my pension to a new credit union account. Solo, private, unlinked. I removed Kyle's access and made sure the notification emails would no longer go to the old joint inbox. The next morning, I picked up a new folder, labeled it Active Response, and began logging every call, every document, every memory that would matter. I wasn't playing defense anymore. The night after meeting with Carla, I sat at my desk in the casita with every light on, papers spread out across the surface like a map of a war. One hadn't realized I was already in. I wasn't looking for revenge. That word always sounds good in movies, but in real life it's too messy, too loud, and rarely holds its shape for long. What I wanted was precision, a clean line between what was mine and what they thought they could take. I needed to make sure that when this all came to light, and it would, there would be no confusion, no wiggle room, and no chance for Kyle or Chelsea to twist the facts into a story where I looked confused, forgetful, or worse, complicit. 3 objectives came into focus, each of them simple on the surface, but each demanding airtight action. First, I needed to legally confirm the lottery ticket belonged to me, not just in theory or family understanding, but in hard, documented ownership. The cash came from my account. The loyalty card used was tied to my name. The stub, still in my workbench drawer, had never left my possession until Kyle claimed it at brunch. Carla and I would start with digital receipts, timestamps, surveillance if needed, anything that made the chain of custody undeniable. Second, I had to trace the handling of my pension funds. Since the day Kyle set up that joint account, he'd had access, and more than once, I'd noticed discrepancies too small to raise alarms, but just large enough to make me wonder. If he moved money around or leveraged my income to secure credit, we'd find it. Carla would go through the banking history, line by line. Third, and maybe most urgent of all, I had to secure my physical space, the casita, before they found a way to lock me out or sell it out from under me. I still held the deed, but I knew how quickly influence and paperwork could change things if I wasn't vigilant. I'd spent too many years watching others get caught sleeping. I wouldn't be one of them. This wasn't about feelings anymore. It was about ownership, documentation, and timing. And from this point on, all 3 were mine to control. It was Carla who found the first crack. She had asked for access to Kyle's shared cloud drive, the one he'd once used to back up our old family photos, tax returns, and receipts from when he was still pretending to be helpful. He must have forgotten that I still had a linked login tucked inside an old email account I hadn't used in years. Most of the folders were dormant, untouched for months, but one caught her attention, a compressed file labeled Big Win. Inside were screenshots, photos, and a single image that froze both of us in place. It was a casual shot, taken with his phone, likely meant for bragging. A lottery ticket resting against the wood grain of my workbench, the same drawer where I kept my drill bits and scratch-off stubs. I knew that drawer like I knew the lines on my own hands. The timestamp was embedded in the metadata, one day before Kyle made his announcement at brunch. He had taken a photo of the winning ticket while it was still in my house, still in my drawer, before he ever claimed it was his. Carla zoomed in on the corner of the image, then cross-referenced the exact timestamp with a text thread Kyle had with a college buddy, one where he messaged, "Dude, we won $23 million. That message was sent 22 minutes after the photo had been taken. In that moment, the shape of things began to change. Until now, much of what we had was circumstantial, suggestive, and leaning on my word. But this was the first breadcrumb that left a trail pointing back to what really happened. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was timeline, sequence, evidence. Carla printed the image and slid it into a new folder, labeled Disputed Ownership, Phase 1. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. "This is how it begins," she said, her tone flat but certain. "You don't need a smoking gun. You just need a steady line of facts they can't erase." I sat back in the chair, not relieved, not angry, just clearer than I'd been in weeks. They'd been careless. And now, the cleanup would be mine. I still had the receipt, tucked in a metal box at the back of my file cabinet. Beneath utility statements and home repair invoices was the small, thermal-printed slip from the ATM withdrawal that matched the day Kyle had picked up propane and claimed the scratcher didn't win. I'd handed him $60 in cash, $40 for propane, $20 for a ticket and snacks, just like I used to when he was in college and broke. It was never a loan back then, just a small habit between a father and a son who used to talk more. Now that receipt served a different purpose. Carla helped me pair it with the loyalty card data from the gas station app I still had on my phone. I'd used the card for years, not because I cared about the points, but because I liked the small confirmations, the quiet trail of where I'd been. That day, the timestamp on the purchase matched the withdrawal almost to the minute. The ticket had been bought 5 minutes after the cash left my account. There was still one piece missing, the surveillance footage. I didn't go through official channels. I called a man I'd worked with back in the audit days, Roger, who now managed regional security compliance for the gas station chain. I didn't explain everything, just said I was trying to settle a personal matter and needed eyes on a specific moment. "Still keeping your receipts, Reyes?" he chuckled. "Figures." A day later, a USB drive showed up in my mailbox, hand-delivered, no return label. Inside was 10 minutes of footage from Pump 3. It showed Kyle's car pulling in, parking, him walking in, coming back out holding a propane receipt and a lottery ticket, fumbling with his keys. No one else was with him. He didn't look excited. He looked routine, like he was doing a chore. I paused the video on the frame where he scratched the ticket against his jeans before tossing it into the passenger seat, unread. It wasn't until later, after he found out it had hit, that he realized what he'd thrown away, and that's what made it mine. He hadn't won it. He'd stumbled into it. With my money, my card, and my routine. And now I had proof. They must have sensed the shift, even if they couldn't name it. I hadn't said anything outright, hadn't made any accusations or challenged their narrative, but I'd stopped responding to their casual messages, stopped letting them control the rhythm of things. That silence, I think, made them nervous. The same people who once dismissed my routines as signs of decline were now trying to predict them. One morning, I noticed the new Ring doorbell installed on the casita without so much as a conversation. I hadn't asked for it. No one had asked me. It was just there, glossy, blinking, wired into the siding like it belonged. Chelsea's voice chirped from the other side of the smart speaker when I stepped outside. "We added it for safety, Richard. You'll get used to it." She didn't wait for a response, just logged off like a manager ending a one-sided call. Later that week, I came back from a quiet lunch with Carla to find the side door ajar. I never leave it that way. Inside, the living room felt subtly wrong. My folders were untouched, but a drawer that hadn't been used in weeks was pulled out slightly, not far, just enough to tell me someone had been inside. Someone looking, and not carefully enough to cover their tracks. That evening, the Wi-Fi cut out. I assumed it was the provider at first, until Kyle stopped by to check on the network. He stood in the doorway, with the confidence of someone who believed he still had control of the situation. "You don't really need internet out here anyway," he said, casual, flipping the router switch off before I could stop him. "It's all streaming garbage. Doesn't do much for your generation." I didn't answer. I just watched him. Not his words, but the way his fingers tapped the edge of the modem, the way he avoided eye contact, the way he kept trying to fill the silence with small dominance moves. They weren't subtle anymore. They were pressing in, trying to shake loose any secrets I might be holding. But what they didn't realize, what they never really understood, was that I'd already stopped playing defense, and I wasn't alone anymore. Once you've followed one breadcrumb, the rest start showing themselves. Carla had always said that money, unlike people, doesn't know how to lie. It moves where it's told, leaves a timestamp behind, and obeys logic more faithfully than any family member ever could. So while Kyle and Chelsea kept up their performance, feigned concern, calculated smiles, passive intrusions, Carla kept combing through account statements, transaction logs, and digital correspondence like she was preparing a case for court. And she found it, a wire transfer, $500,000, moved from our joint savings account to an escrow company based in Tucson 2 days after the brunch announcement. The transfer reference read, "Early closing Condo Martins," Chelsea's maiden name. The money hadn't gone into savings. It hadn't been set aside for taxes or retirement. It had gone to her parents for a property they hadn't even tried to hide. I remembered Gerald bragging over brunch about finally being near the golf course. It hadn't registered at the time. Now it did. They had taken winnings that weren't theirs, and within 48 hours started spreading it around like it was clean. That same evening, while checking old emails for anything related to the ticket, I found a receipt I'd forgotten existed. An auto-confirmation from the Arizona Lottery app. It was linked to an account I'd set up years ago but hadn't used in a while. Apparently, the app remembered me. Kyle had logged in as, quote, helper, a feature that allowed users to buy tickets on behalf of seniors or others with physical limitations. It was meant to support caregivers. The digital receipt showed the purchase date, ticket serial, payment method, everything. The card on file was mine. I printed it out and slid it into the growing folder labeled Evidence, Primary Source. Carla reviewed it the next morning, nodded once and said, "We've got a full loop now. Funding, purchase, unauthorized claim, and disbursement." And she was right. They hadn't just lied. They hadn't just manipulated. They had created a full financial fiction, assuming I wouldn't have the clarity or resources to catch it. But I had both, and now I had the paper to match. The envelope nearly ended up in the trash. It arrived folded, with a forwarding sticker pasted over my old address. The main house, not the casita. And for a moment, I assumed it was just another piece of redirected junk. I wouldn't have even opened it if I hadn't noticed the logo in the corner. Arizona State Lottery Commission. Plain. Official. Printed in navy ink. I sat down at the kitchen table and slid my pocket knife beneath the seal, careful not to tear the contents. Inside was a single-page letter, a blank W-9 tax form, and a note that read, "As the registered ticket holder, please confirm identity prior to disbursement finalization." I stared at the phrase for a long time, registered ticket holder. The letter had been sent to me, not to Kyle, not to some legal firm, me. The address redirect meant Kyle had intercepted it first. He'd opened it. I could see the careful tear and the repackaged crease, then tossed it, assuming I'd never see it. But someone had missed the pickup, or perhaps he'd thought it irrelevant once he believed he'd secured control. I took the envelope and slid it beside the gas station video stills, the ATM receipt, and the lottery app confirmation. Each document alone was weight. Together, they became something more mass. Carla didn't speak when I handed it over. She simply held the page to the light, checked the timestamp, and added it to the growing portfolio with a small motion of approval. "This letter," she said, "is the state recognizing you as the owner, not him. If it comes down to legal verification, this will anchor the argument." It wasn't just proof of purchase anymore, it was recognition. Quiet, bureaucratic, and absolutely unambiguous. Someone in the system had already attached my name to the winning numbers, and Kyle had tried to bury it. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not from worry that had passed, but from something else entirely. The kind of slow-burning focus that replaces fear once you've finally decided to push back. I sat in the casita with the letter on the table, the porch light casting shadows across the tile. For the first time since this all began, I knew exactly where I stood. And Kyle, whether he knew it or not, was already losing ground. It wasn't the evidence that got to me. Not the receipts, or the footage, or the envelope with my name on it. What settled deepest, what stayed with me in the quiet moments, was the voice on the other end of the phone that night. Dennis had called around 9:30. A voice I'd known for decades, worn smooth by years of early mornings and shared war stories at the VFW hall. We hadn't spoken much in the last few months. Life gets in the way, routines drift, but when his name popped up on the caller ID, I felt that small flicker of familiarity, the kind that usually comforts more than it hurts. But this time, it hurt. "Hey, Rich," he said, clearing his throat in the way he always did when he was about to step into something awkward. "Just wanted to check in. Some of the guys were saying, well, I heard you were moving into a place." He let the words hang. Not accusing, not cruel, just cautious. That kind of cautious that people use when they're not sure how far the fall has already gone. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I could feel something closing in my chest, like a door I hadn't realized was still open. "They're saying Kyle and Chelsea are helping you transition," Dennis continued, softer now. "Said you were having a hard time managing the property. Figured you'd want something quieter." I let him finish, let him say it all without interruption. Then I took a breath, slow and steady. "I'm not moving," I said finally, "and I'm managing just fine." There was a long pause on his end. "Well, good," he said, though his voice held less certainty than I wanted to hear. "Just didn't sit right. Didn't sound like you." When we hung up, I didn't turn on the television or reach for a book. I sat there in the casita, the light dimmed, the night outside pressing against the windows, and opened the drawer where Maria's journals were kept. I read her words slowly, small, looping handwriting, filled with thoughts she never meant for anyone else. She wrote about love, patience, and the weight of family. And I sat there wondering how I had let it get this far without speaking sooner. The invitation came wrapped in surrender. I called Kyle the following morning and asked if he and Chelsea could come over for dinner. Said I wanted to talk about the transition, about next steps, about doing things the right way. I could hear the shift in his voice before he even answered, that slight lift in tone, the easy confidence of someone who thought he'd finally won. "Of course," he said, almost too quickly. "We were going to bring it up anyway. It's time we all got on the same page." I agreed. Told him I'd cook, that it would be casual. Just family. He said they'd be there. No hesitation. What he didn't know was that Carla and Dennis would be there too. Not seated at the table, not part of the meal, but present. Carla would arrive early and stay in the back room, ready to witness, ready to take notes if needed. Dennis would arrive shortly after, dressed like he always was, in clean denim and a pressed flannel, giving the air of a neighbor stopping by for coffee, but his presence would serve another purpose. He was known, trusted. He would be a neutral pair of eyes, a quiet weight that would shift the balance just enough to keep Kyle honest, or at least off balance. I also made a call to the lottery's legal department. Not a formal complaint, not yet. I told them I was the registered ticket holder and wanted to schedule a notarized identity confirmation. I asked what documentation I needed to provide, and when they offered me a time slot the following afternoon, I booked it. I didn't tell Kyle. I didn't tell anyone but Carla. This was the move that would matter later, once the dust settled, and someone had to explain where the money went. That evening, I pulled out Maria's old tablecloth, the one with the faded blue stitching along the edge, and set the table the way she used to, with cloth napkins and the heavier silverware. Kyle thought he was walking into a farewell. He didn't realize he was stepping into a deposition in disguise. And by the time he sat down to eat, the foundation he thought he'd built would already be shifting beneath his feet. The community hall wasn't my first choice. I'd planned to host them at the casita, where the walls carried weight and every picture frame could remind them what they were trying to erase. But Carla had advised neutral ground, somewhere public enough to temper outbursts, private enough to conduct a real conversation. So I booked the back room of the neighborhood center, the one they usually used for HOA meetings and retirement planning seminars. It smelled faintly of coffee and dust, which felt just fine to me. I arrived an hour early to prepare. Carla helped set the table. Nothing extravagant, just catered barbecue in paper trays, with proper place settings and enough folding chairs to make it look informal. Dennis arrived 15 minutes later and took a seat near the wall, not drawing attention to himself, just present, watching. That was enough. When Kyle and Chelsea walked in, they brought energy with them, loud, smiling energy, the kind that's meant to command the room before anyone else can speak. Chelsea wore something new, something tailored to say she belonged in a better zip code. Kyle had that swagger in his shoulders again, the one I hadn't seen since college, when he still thought charm could smooth over debt. "Smells good in here," Kyle said, patting my shoulder like I was the host of a party instead of the owner of the house they were trying to steal. I gave them a few minutes. We sat, passed plates, exchanged surface-level pleasantries, let them relax into the illusion of control. Then Carla placed the folder on the table. She didn't push it across dramatically. She didn't raise her voice or introduce herself like an attorney, preparing for war. She simply opened the front flap, smoothed the first page with her hand, and looked at Kyle. "Before we go any further," she said, calm and even, "Mr. Reyes has a few clarifications he'd like to offer, particularly around the ownership of the lottery ticket." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was expectant. Kyle's jaw tightened just slightly. Chelsea set her fork down without realizing it. The performance had ended. They just hadn't realized the audience had changed. Carla didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Instead, she placed the first sheet at the center of the table, the ATM receipt from the morning Kyle picked up the ticket. She spoke as she slid it forward, as if explaining something routine, something inevitable. "This is a withdrawal for $60 from Mr. Reyes, personal account, time-stamped exactly 6 minutes before the lottery ticket was purchased." Before either of them could respond, she added the second sheet, the gas station transaction record. The loyalty card data showed my name, my account number, and the precise time the ticket was bought. "Same day, same station," she continued, "with a loyalty card registered to Mr. Reyes, not to Kyle, and not to any joint account." Chelsea shifted in her seat, but Kyle leaned back, arms crossed, his face already tightening. "Come on," he said, with a chuckle that didn't quite land. "He gave me the cash. He didn't care about the ticket. We buy scratchers all the time. It was just casual." Carla didn't respond to him. She simply placed down the next piece, the Arizona Lottery app confirmation, emailed to my account, showing the helper feature Kyle had used. "Intent," she said softly, "doesn't override ownership, and your digital signature places the purchase under Mr. Reyes' credentials." There was a pause. Then I laid down the envelope. The W-9, addressed to me, forwarded, opened, and nearly thrown away. Kyle's smirk faltered. "You were never supposed to see that," he said, half under his breath. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. Looked long enough for the weight of what he'd done to settle in the space between us. Carla finished with the photo, the one he'd taken of the ticket while it was still in my drawer, before anyone announced anything. She placed it down last, not like a hammer, but like a cornerstone. "That image," she said, "was time-stamped a full day before your public claim. Taken inside Mr. Reyes' workbench. This is no longer a discussion of fairness or generosity. It's a question of legal fraud." Kyle's hands were no longer resting easy. They were clenched on his knees, and for the first time since brunch, he had nothing left to say. For a long moment, the room was still. Kyle's fingers twitched where they rested on his knee, and Chelsea's eyes darted between Carla's papers as if trying to find a loophole in the middle of the page. But no one spoke, and in that silence something shifted. Not loudly, not theatrically, but like a tide rolling out from beneath their feet. Then Carla tapped her phone once and placed it on the table, speaker facing up. A voice answered almost immediately, calm and professional. "This is Dana Wells with the Arizona State Lottery Legal Department. I'm confirming I'm speaking with Mr. Richard Reyes." I leaned in, speaking clearly. "Yes, this is Richard Reyes." "Mr. Reyes," she continued, "we have record of a ticket registered under your name via the official lottery app. Confirmation of purchase was issued on March 7th at 3:42 p.m. under your loyalty account. We've received no formal claim under your profile. Are you intending to complete the verification process?" "I am," I said. "In person, tomorrow." There was a short pause. "Understood. Please bring identification and original documentation. Any conflicting claim may be subject to internal fraud review, as per state procedure." Carla thanked her and ended the call without commentary. She didn't need to explain what that meant. Everyone in the room understood. Kyle's posture changed. Shoulders slumped slightly, jaw tense in a way that made it hard for him to hold his usual expression. It wasn't guilt. Not yet. Just the realization that something was unraveling, and no one in the room was rushing to help him tie it back together. That's when Dennis stood up. Not loudly, not confrontational, just steady. He stepped beside me, not saying a word, just making it clear where he stood. Not between, but behind. Supporting. Witnessing. And maybe, for Kyle, that was the moment things became real. Because it wasn't just paperwork anymore. It was community. It was consequence. It was one of the old men he used to roll his eyes at now watching him like a judge watches a defendant. Not with anger, but with disappointment that cuts deeper. Kyle looked around the room, searching for control he no longer had. And for the first time since that brunch, I watched the smugness drain out of his face like color from spilled paint. When things fall apart, they don't usually explode, they peel. The moment Carla ended the call, the mood shifted. Not just in the room, but in the air around Kyle and Chelsea, as if something invisible had broken loose and started circling them, refusing to be ignored. For a while they sat still, absorbing what the voice on the speakerphone had confirmed. But then Chelsea stood up. Not quickly, not dramatically, just with the tight, rehearsed posture of someone who'd been holding a plan in her head far too long and now realized she wouldn't be able to finish it. "I need some air," she said to no one in particular, already halfway to the door. Her phone buzzed in her hand as she walked outside, and though she tried to keep her voice low, I heard enough to understand who was on the other end. It was her father. I recognized the name on the caller ID when it lit up before she answered. Gerald Martin, the man who, 2 weeks earlier, had raised a glass to their good fortune at brunch, telling the table about his upcoming condo near the course. A man who, judging by the frozen wire transfer Carla had flagged, had likely just learned that his $500,000 gift was on legally shaky ground. Chelsea's voice was low but tense. She was pacing outside the community center's windows, the glass doing little to muffle her frustration. "No, Dad. I don't know. Just calm down. It's not settled yet. It's... Yes. I saw the envelope. I told Kyle we should have shredded it." Inside, Kyle had stopped pretending to look confident. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clenched like he was holding something together by sheer force. When he finally looked at me, there wasn't arrogance in his expression anymore. Just panic, poorly disguised as confusion. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "You said you didn't care about the money." I didn't answer him right away, because the truth was, I hadn't, not in the beginning. But when someone takes what's yours and lies about it, it's not about the money anymore. It's about being erased, and I wasn't going quietly. By Monday morning, the first notice was filed. Carla had drawn up the paperwork over the weekend, clear, precise, and grounded in documentation. The legal hold on the lottery winnings was triggered not by accusation, but by evidence. She submitted the receipt trail, the recorded audio from the lottery verification call, and a notarized statement of ownership signed by me and witnessed by Dennis. It was enough to pause everything. No distributions, no transfers, just a pending claim under fraud review. The moment the hold went into place, the ripples started. The joint account Kyle had been using, the one I'd quietly unlinked 2 weeks earlier, was flagged for audit. My pension funds were locked to my new credit union, inaccessible to him now. There was no warning, just a login failure he couldn't explain, and a notification that access permissions had been revoked by the account originator. By noon, my attorney filed a motion citing financial manipulation and elder exploitation. Nothing dramatic, just a legal statement that barred Kyle and Chelsea from initiating further changes to my finances, property, or personal records without written consent. Carla forwarded the motion directly to the bank's compliance officer, who immediately froze any pending transactions linked to the lottery windfall. That included the $500,000 transferred to Chelsea's parents. The condo deal, which had not yet fully closed, stalled without warning. And the luxury car? It had been paid in full, or so they thought, but the leasing company, now aware of a fraud review tied to the lottery claim, reclassified the transaction as, quote, under dispute. Kyle received a polite but firm email notifying him that the vehicle's title would remain suspended until further notice. Without clear funds, possession meant very little. None of it happened with shouts or slammed doors, just policy, enforcement, and the weight of facts stepping in where emotion had once clouded judgment. They had built their momentum on the assumption that I wouldn't push back, that I wouldn't have the clarity, support, or documentation to resist. But each filing, each hold, each frozen account reminded them. I wasn't confused. I was prepared. The locksmith came on a Thursday. No ceremony, no awkward small talk. Just a man in a gray work shirt who nodded when I pointed to the door of the casita. I watched from the porch as he removed the old lock, the one Kyle had insisted we upgrade when he first moved back in, claiming it was just for safety. It always bothered me how easily he'd said that word, like it was his to define. When the locksmith was finished, he handed me 2 fresh keys. One I clipped to the loop on my belt, where it would stay. The other I hung on the little hummingbird hook Maria had mounted by the front door, back when she used to leave the house early for church choir and didn't want to wake me by digging through drawers. It felt right, doing it that way, quiet, undeniable. By then, my pension had fully cleared into the credit union account, one only I had access to. Carla and my attorney continued managing the fraud review, but their tone had shifted. They spoke in terms of completion now, not investigation. The evidence was clean. The timeline spoke for itself. I didn't see Kyle or Chelsea again. Not in court, not at the house, not even in passing at the grocery store. From what I heard through the neighborhood network, that soft chain of conversation that always exists in communities like ours, Chelsea's parents pulled out of the condo deal completely. Gerald had apparently gone red in the face at the title office when the hold came through. The luxury car disappeared soon after. Returned, maybe. Or repossessed. It didn't matter. The things they bought weren't mine to worry about, but the space they'd tried to take, my home, my independence, my right to be trusted in my own skin, that was mine again. And now, finally, protected. That night I opened one of Maria's journals and read the entry from our 35th anniversary. She'd written about how proud she was of our quiet life, how strength didn't always look like noise or force. Sometimes it was just choosing not to give up your seat at your own table. I left the porch light on a little longer that night, not because I was waiting, but because I could.